This is Gary Swanson with Americans Remembered, interviewing Lawrence Robinson Russell Laurie at his home in Prairie Village, Kansas on August 2nd, 2011. Laurie served in Uncle Sam's Navy during World War II. He was a shipboard sailor on LSMR 191. His highest rank was Lieutenant Junior grade. Laurie was born January the 20th, 1921, served from September 1943 to September of 1946. He's the holder of a number of medals and ribbons, including the Asiatic Pacific with 1 battle star, the Victory Medal, the American Theater, and others. Laurie, where did you grow up as a kid?
I grew up in Lawrence mostly. I was born in Parsons, but we moved to Lawrence when I was 2 years old.
And what was your daddy's name?
Frank A. Russell.
Frank A. Russell. And how about your mother and her maiden name?
Minnie A. Sweeney.
Frank and Minnie.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any idea where your mom and dad might have met?
Yeah, they met in Kansas City. They were both living in different rooming houses on Truth Street, around 25th.
Did they both grow up in Kansas City?
No, my dad grew up on a farm in Kansas, Peabody, Kansas.
Peabody? Yeah, I know Peabody.
My mother grew up in Carthage, Illinois. She was here working for the telephone company.
And he was here.
He was working for the railroad, and
they found each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's the good news. Well, that's wonderful. Did your daddy happen to serve in World War I?
No, he did not. He was too old.
To the best of your knowledge, in looking back, Laurie, do you have family members that served in the military anytime previous to World War II, like World War I or the Civil War?
No. My wife had a grandfather who served in the Civil War.
So how many brothers and sisters did you have?
I had 1 brother and 2 sisters.
And were you the oldest, youngest?
I was number 3 out of 4.
3 out of 4? And you're obviously living. How many of your brothers and sisters, of the other 3 are still living?
They're all gone.
They're all gone, save you.
I'm the survivor.
And you were number 3. Did your brother happen to serve in World War II?
Oh yeah, he was in the Navy.
As well? Was he a shipboard sailor like you were?
No, he worked on ordnance work in San Francisco.
What kind of work did your daddy do to feed his family?
He was a professor of civil engineering at KU.
Oh, at KU, so you came by your interest in engineering quite naturally.
Yes.
And where had he gotten his civil engineering training?
At KU.
At KU.
Class of 1908.
1908. Well, you know, it's very unusual back at that time for many to finish high school, let alone going to college. And then
he had 7 brothers, and none of them got beyond high school age. Many of them not even that.
And where did he grow up when he went to KU as a student? Where was he coming from? Was he in Lawrence at the time, or?
No, came from the Peabody area.
From Peabody.
Peabody, Kansas.
And he's the first person in his family probably to go to college, let alone graduate.
That's right. He was unusual in that respect.
Very unusual. Quite a major accomplishment in the class of 1908.
Yeah.
Civil Engineering, University of Kansas. And then he became a professor there.
Yes, after working for about 10 years for different railroads as a civil engineer.
Well, that was a great career. So you went to high school in Lawrence then?
My dad?
Grade school, you.
No, yes, in Lawrence.
You went to grade school and high school in Lawrence.
That's right.
What year did you graduate high school?
1939.
1939. Right in the terrible, you lived there in the Depression era. Very difficult time for most people. Your dad at that time was a professor, so
Yes.
he was gainfully employed, which is a real blessing compared to.
But he came home one day, about 1932 or 33, and he said, I've got good news and bad news. The bad news is that they cut my salary in half because of the Depression. But the good news is I still have a job.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, he looked at it very realistically because at that time there were a lot of people who didn't.
Yes.
And a lot of people in town, as you know, had a real tough time. If you're on the farm, you probably had something to eat, and no cash money. In town, you had to grub for whatever you could get.
Mm-hmm.
Now, where'd your people come from? Where did the Russells come from? What country, when? Do you know?
No, we can only go back to his grandfather, whose name was L.Z. Russell, but he was what they call a bound boy. And
L.Z. was a bound boy.
yeah,
Came here as a involuntary servitude of some sort.
yes. And we can't trace his lineage.
Mm-hmm. Well, they probably need to keep a lot of records on bound boys, be my guess.
No, but he took the name of the people who took him in.
And what country did he come from?
We don't know.
And how about your mama's people? Do you know anything about them?
Yeah, they were in New York, and later Ohio, and then Indiana, and eventually Illinois.
And where did they come from originally? What country? You know?
I think Holland.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it's not unusual to have a sketchy family history going back past the United States. Mm-hmm. So you went to high school in Lawrence, graduated in 1939.
Yes.
And because your father was a professor there, and because I'm sure you're probably academically gifted compared to a lot of people, you wanted to go to college, and did you start college right away? Start
Yes.
the university right away?
The fall of '39.
And with the intent of majoring in
Engineering.
engineering, after all, it did run in the family.
Yes.
Well, that's wonderful. And so college years were probably fairly uneventful, albeit
Well, the war was just
the war began,
so
so
long right in the middle of my college.
so people were leaving right and left, weren't they?
Yes.
I mean, to go to the military.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941 to begin World War II. You remember where you were that day?
It was Sunday. And that's about all I remember, but my question was, what's Pearl Harbor? I'd never heard of that before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, you're not alone in that. Nobody knew where Pearl Harbor was.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a mystery, but quickly found out, and all of a sudden your classmates began leaving, and your friends that you knew who were in town working left. You were about 3 years into your civil engineering degree. Mechanical, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And so you joined the Navy, and they said, well, we're going to take you, but we want you to graduate first. But now that was...
The Navy never expressed itself that way, but the local draft board thought it was a good idea
Oh, I see, okay.
to let me finish my degree.
Well, it was a good idea. They did you a great favor by allowing you to, you would have finished anyway later, but it'd be nice to go into the service as a,
Yes.
with a college education behind you, because it automatically qualified you for, if you could pass the test and so on, to become an officer. So you finally, when did you finish your mechanical engineering degree?
In the spring of 1943.
In the spring of 1943, and so you went reasonably quickly after that to the Navy, didn't you?
Well, I worked 3 months for the Aluminum Company of America in Chicago, and then decided to go into the Navy after 3 months.
And did you go through an OCS type of training, or did they commission you?
They commissioned me, and then I went to indoctrination school at Fort Schuyler.
At Fort Schuyler, New York, and had your brother already gone to the service?
Yeah, he was 6 years older, so he went in with a commission, and they assigned him to Mare Island shipyards in San Francisco.
Do you remember the day that you shook your daddy's hand and kissed your mama goodbye? Was that an emotional time in your family?
I don't remember it that way. I remember it as an adventure I was anxious to get onto.
Yes, which was probably a little bit differently than the way they were looking at it, with their only two sons going off to war, with the newspapers filled every day of serious, bad wartime news. But moms and dads did what sons and daughters did, what they had to at the time. So how did you get along in the indoctrination class? You're an ensign in Uncle Sam's Navy, don't know anything about the Navy. They get all you fellows together at Fort Schuyler, New York, and we're going to make sailors out of you. How'd you get along in that environment?
Well, that was fun. That was an interesting time. It kept us busy.
And then, did you go to some other schools after that?
Yeah, I went to a school in Washington, D.C. after Fort Schuyler. I think it was the gunnery school.
But finally, you got an assignment, which was to what? LSMR
LSMR 191.
191, which you were part of you were a plank owner, meaning that you were on the very first crew of that ship, and you probably were a crew member before it was commissioned, probably a month or
Yes.
so. And where was the ship commissioned?
In Charleston, South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Charleston Navy Yard.
And so you quickly built up a crew, I'm sure, of how big was the crew on a LSMR?
How did they what?
How big was the crew? How many?
85.
85 men, which were what, probably 8 or 9 officers then, and the skipper?
I think 6 officers, and the rest were non-commissioned.
And what was your specific duty assignment?
Gunnery officer. Because I had been to several gunnery schools.
So you probably, what, you go on a shakedown cruise and then headed straight for the Pacific through the canal?
Yeah, we had a shakedown exercises for a week or two, and then started for the Panama Canal, and then back to San Diego, and then to Hawaii, and then on to Okinawa.
Well, the war was moving along fast and furiously, as you know,
Yes.
at that time, and you got over there. Well, it'd been after the first of the year of 45, probably. We made the invasion of Okinawa April the 1st of 1945, and you were offshore, I'm sure, sometime prior to that time, you and your sister ships.
We were there about a week ahead of that.
And what was the scene like? I mean, when you you finally get to where what turned out to be a very, very significant battle, and a large one which we lost 10,000 men killed,
Yeah.
many from the Navy. What was the scene like when you were, if you had to describe how it was back then?
Oh, thousands of ships of all kinds gathered there right after the initial invasion.
And
But we bombarded the shores before that.
and then what was the specific responsibility of your ship, the 191?
Well, after we got through the bombing phase, then they assigned us to radar picket duty. And their radar pickets were to warn the ships that were in the close to the island about oncoming swarms of kamikazes who were coming down from Japan.
And of course, that was the well, that was the last major battle. That was kind of a last gasp effort on the part of the Japanese, and that it was kamikaze central, if you will. I mean, all kinds of planes.
Yeah, they were desperate, and that's why they created this suicide mission.
And
They,
what? Go ahead.
we understood that they gave them their funeral service before they left to come down to Okinawa.
The equivalent of a one-way ticket.
A one-way ticket.
Now, you were small fry as far as the kamikazes be concerned. They wanted to go after the carriers and the
Usually-
bandwagons, but nonetheless, you got a lot of residual action as a result of all of that,
Yeah.
I'm sure.
The typical radar picket was manned by a destroyer and 3 or 4 smaller vessels. And the smaller vessels were there to pick up survivors after the destroyer was sunk. And we did have one. The Pringle was sunk at our radar picket station, and we did pick up survivors.
How many men were lost on the Pringle, do you know?
I think about 300.
And you and probably sister ships picked up survivors from water.
Yes.
Did you have any interaction with them personally, with the survivors?
No.
And the kamikazes, did they bother any of the LSMs that were out there?
Yes, they did. They sunk, I believe, 4 of them.
Well, and you were busy as a gunnery officer, I'm sure.
Yeah, I was the guy that pushed the buttons to launch the rockets.
And what kind, when you say rockets, how big were they, and what was the distance, and what was the capability?
Oh, they were about 6 feet long, and they consisted of a 5-inch 38 shell with a rocket motor attached.
And how many rockets would you carry or have the ability to launch at one time, let's say?
We could launch about, when we were fully loaded, we could launch about 200 at a time.
Wow. And at Japanese airplanes, principally?
No, those are for rocket barn, for the shore bombardment.
Oh, yeah, I see.
And then we had a 5-inch 38 gun to fight off aircraft.
And you had smaller 20 millimeters, didn't you say?
A couple of 40 millimeters, and about 6 20 millimeters.
So your general quarters job was right there amongst the...
I was up in the conning tower with the captain.
directing the gunnery people.
Yes.
How many people would you have, how many gunnery people would you have out of a crew of 85, 15 or 20?
Yeah, I suppose when we went to general quarters, the gunnery operation was probably took 40 people.
Because a lot of people had other duties in
Yes.
normal circumstances. When you went to general quarters, they became loaders or
Yeah,
ammo handlers or. What was the worst day you spent during that time as you look back and recall?
the worst one.
What was the worst day that maybe you spent there at Okinawa as you look back?
Oh, I think it was the day that the Pringle was sunk, and to watch it go down and see all the survivors swimming toward the ship.
Well, it had to be. It had to be. Now, shortly after the invasion of Okinawa, President Roosevelt died, which is April the 12th of 1945. I'm sure you heard about that.
Oh, yes.
But
And our first question was, well, what are they going to do? Do they have a vice president? We had never heard of Harry Truman.
well, Roosevelt was such an imposing figure, as you know. I mean, he was beginning his 13th year in office. For most of the people working for you, most of the sailors, they were maybe 4 or 5 years old when he went into office. So he's the only president that anybody knew.
That's right.
So it would be unusual for you to speculate a whole lot about who the vice president was. Well, and shortly after that, the war in Europe ended on May the 8th of 45, and I'm sure you were still busy at Okinawa then. Finally,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Right. We were still on radar picket duty at that time.
And were you at radar picket duty until Okinawa was secured, and probably even a little past that time?
Yeah.
Well, the war was still going on. Finally, August the 6th, 1945, thanks to our President Harry Truman, we dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Now, you're an ordnance guy, so you knew about bombs and stuff. Did you know what an atomic bomb was?
No, we had no idea what an atomic bomb was.
And here you are, you're an engineer,
Yeah.
a school-trained engineer, you're an ordnance man,
Yeah.
didn't know. How would you know?
They kept it a secret.
And then August 9th, we dropped the second bomb on Nagasaki, and they still didn't surrender. Finally, the Japanese saw the wisdom of surrendering on what we now call Victory over Japan Day,
Yeah.
August 15th, 1945. And as you know, the surrender of the Japanese was signed on the deck of the USS Missouri battleship, September 2nd in Tokyo Bay. The war is over.
Yes.
Now, I'm sure that probably what was on most people's mind when they heard the war was over was, when do I get to go home?
That's right.
And how soon did you get to come home?
I came. By that time, we went to the West Coast, and we waited there. And they finally released me about the 1st of March, 1946. But I didn't actually leave the Navy until September of 46. But I was married the 21st of March.
Okay, we'll talk about your family here in a little bit. Had you given thought to you got an engineering degree before you left and went to the Navy, but hardly much opportunity to put it to use except in the Navy. Had you given thought as to what you were going to do when you got out of the service? You already have a college education now.
Yeah, not very much, but I thought that it would be best for me to settle in the Kansas City area, close to Lawrence. And I already knew about Black and Beach, and so that was the first place I went to look for a job.
And they said, we want you.
Yes.
At Black and Beach now, then with a great reputation, and now with an even greater reputation. And so you joined them as a mechanical engineer?
That's right.
And how long did you stay with Black and Veatch?
I stayed with them for about 15 years until 1963, and that's when we moved to Omaha.
And you began working for
Henningsen, Durham, and Richardson in Omaha.
a different, another consulting engineering firm?
Yes,
Doing roughly the same kind of work?
that's right.
And so how long did you work in Omaha then?
Oh, for the next 20 years or so. And I started my own practice in the early 80s. It was a good thing. I did that for several years, 85, 86.
What year did you retire? Do you remember? Long period of time as an engineer. Have you done any work since then? Since you retired from your own business?
No.
Well, that's a wonderful career. How many years did you do engineering work? That'd be, gosh, from
I guess
40 years.
Yeah, about that.
Well, you should have it figured out by now.
Yes.
Well, that's wonderful. That's a great career. Let's talk about the most important part of your life, your family. You and June were married March the 21st, 1946.
Yes.
So this is, well, you weren't even out of the Navy yet.
Not out of the Navy. No.
When and where had you met June?
I met June 2 months before Pearl Harbor when we were both students at KU.
Do you remember how you met her? Under what
Yeah.
circumstances?
Yeah, I was dating her sorority sister. And after a month or two, she decided that I wasn't interesting enough. But by that time, I had met June at the sorority house, the Delta Gamma house. So I started dating June, and we got along fine.
Do you remember where you went on your first date?
No.
Well, did sparks fly right away, though? Did sparks fly right away?
I think so.
Well, they must have been. And then you went away for, well, you were gone a couple years.
Yes.
And what was she doing during that time? Pining for you, no doubt, but what else was she doing?
Well, she graduated the same time I did from KU. She taught school in Platte City, Missouri for a year. And then she went to New York and got a job as on a Broadway show, singing in the chorus.
Really?
Yeah.
And what show was she in?
Mexican Hayride.
Mexican Hayride.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Did you ever see her in Mexican Hayride?
No, I was busy with the Navy.
Yes. Did you ever get a CD of the, or back then, not a CD, but a record
Yeah.
of Mexican Hayride?
Uh-huh.
And so how long did that last for her?
Oh, let's see, probably about 9 months.
Huh?
They closed the show in 45, about middle of 45. So that's when she decided to join the USO. So she left about the time that the atomic bomb was dropped.
Left the USO? She left the USO about that time?
No, the troop, the USO troop that she joined, left for a tour of the Pacific about the time that the atomic bomb was dropped.
Was she in that tour?
Yes.
And so where did she go during the tour?
Well, she went to Hawaii, Saipan, Tinian, Iwo Jima, Peleliu.
Meanwhile, you were on your way home.
I was already in Hawaii being converted to an ammunition carrier.
Uh-huh. Well, you kind of switched venues there.
Yeah.
That's a great story. Now, she graduated the same time you did. I mean, at the time you left to go with the Navy, was it well understood that you and she were going to be Mr. and Mrs. sometime?
No, we never had any agreement,
But
but we kept in touch.
you kept writing back and forth, and
Yes, I've got a whole box of letters.
well, you know, there's many a love story that developed during that letter by letter by letter by letter.
Yes,
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. And so you're married in 1946 and March the 21st, so right if you got home. Where'd you get married?
in Topeka.
Topeka, Kansas. Did you have a honeymoon?
No, not really. I was still in the Navy, and we went to Washington, D.C. That was where the Navy sent me. I worked in the Navy department there for a while.
Oh, and did she work then? I mean, she accompanied you and you got an apartment or something?
Yeah, we found somebody who would sublet us an apartment.
It was hard to find a place to live, wasn't it?
Yes,
But you worked it out. Well, that's a wonderful story of what you did and then what she did while you were both gone. How many children do you and June have?
we have 3.
3? And who's child number 1?
Annette.
Annette? Beautiful name.
Her name is Annette Zimmerman now.
Annette Zimmerman, where does she live today?
She lives in Lenexa,
Here in town? That's wonderful.
Lenexa,
Does
Kansas.
she have children?
Yes, she had 3 children. 2 of them are mechanical engineers.
I'm going to give you a test now. What are their names?
Well, the first one's named Russell, but they call him Rusty. And he has red hair because he had 2 grandmothers who had red hair.
He comes by it naturally.
Yeah. And then there was Stuart, and then there was Frank.
Okay, and 2 of them are mechanical engineers.
Stuart's a mechanical engineer.
Well, how about the child number 2 of yours?
Oh, that's Stuart. Stuart, he's a mechanical engineer.
Your son, Stuart.
Yes.
Okay, and where does Stuart live?
He lives in Wheaton, Illinois.
Okay, he's not close by here now. Does he have children?
Yes. Yeah, they have 2 boys, William and Charles.
William and Charles. And how about your third child? You and
Yeah.
June.
Yeah, his name is Frank, and he lives in Maui, Hawaii. And he's a musician. He plays the keyboards. He's also sells solar electric systems for people who are not close to the transmission lines in Hawaii.
And he's not a mechanical engineer.
No,
Okay, so a professional musician? I mean, he plays professionally?
yeah, I think you would say that, yes.
Well, that's wonderful. So 3 children. I didn't keep track of how many grandchildren then.
5 grandchildren,
5. And any great grandchildren?
2.
And to whom do they belong?
They belong to Rusty Zimmerman.
And I'm really going to put you to the test. What are their names?
Miranda and Jackson.
You do really well. Miranda and Jackson.
Yeah.
Okay, let's trace the engineering legacy here in your family. Your daddy graduated 1908. Kansas University as an engineer, was a professor there forever.
Yeah.
You graduated as a mechanical engineer. And you have a couple other mechanical engineers.
My brother was a mechanical engineer.
That was your older brother.
Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, you should have that mechanical engineering thing figured out by now.
I think so.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. So 3 children, 5 grandchildren, 2 great-grandchildren. That is a wonderful family. And one of them living close by here. the
Yes.
daughter in Lenexa. Yeah, that's absolutely wonderful. You've got some great pictures, Laurie. Let's take a look at some of them. Here's a great shot of Laurie's mom and dad on the occasion of their wedding, which is 1914.
Yes.
Your father graduated University of Kansas 1908 with a civil engineering degree
Yes.
and had a wonderful career teaching there.
Well, he worked for different railroads.
As a civil engineer for several railroads,
Yes.
and then became a professor. Beautiful family, beautiful mom and dad. And Laurie's mom and dad took a honeymoon trip to California on the train, and here they are standing in front of the old steam engine that got them there.
Yeah. This is the Muir Woods, California.
Muir Woods, California, where the big redwoods are.
Yes.
And here's a great shot of Laurie as a little wart in Kansas City, Missouri. Well, probably about 1922 or 3. Enjoying himself.
1922.
1922. Who's this handsome guy, Laurie?
That's me. October of 1944. About the time I became a member of the crew of the 191.
And here's LSMR landing ship medium rocket 191, of which Laurie was the gunnery officer.
This was taken in Hawaii.
Taken in Hawaii. And here's a wedding picture of Laurie and June on March 21st, 1946. He was still in the Navy.
Topeka, Kansas.
Topeka, Kansas. Beautiful picture. While Laurie was back in the States after coming back from war, his June was off with the USO troop to the South Pacific. And this is a picture taken on Peleliu. And
By an official Navy photographer.
by an official Navy photographer.
She's dressed in a Japanese costume, a geisha costume.
Beautiful. And here's the house that Laurie grew up in Lawrence, Kansas, at
56, Illinois.
56, Illinois. Lawrence, Kansas.
This is about 1932.
Yeah, the pictures is 1931, so that's been a day or two, 80 years ago.
Note
the tree house in the upper right there of the picture. I bet you scampered up and down that tree a few times.
Oh, yes.
And here's a wonderful shot of Laurie and his brother and his 2 sisters growing up in Lawrence, Kansas.
In 1928.
1928. And what was your younger sister's name?
Ruth.
Ruth? Mm-hmm. And then Frank was your brother?
No, Robert was my
Robert, and who's the beautiful older girl?
Alice.
Alice. Here's a wonderful shot of Laurie's family. We've got, in days gone by, little Annette, and June, and Laurie, and Stuart the older,
Yes.
and the younger lad,
Is Frank.
Frank. What a beautiful family. What year was this taken? Do you remember?
1960.
1960. It's only been 51 years ago. What a handsome family. Laurie's mom and dad, when they were a little older, taken 1950, 61 years ago. A great family reunion shot in Omaha, Nebraska, 2006. You'll recognize yourself. We'll start in the back. Beautiful family. And here's a picture taken in 1996 of the reunion of
The 191.
Laurie's ship. And they've had some reunions since, but the crowd is getting smaller and smaller, as you might imagine. A lot of fond memories from this group of people. Laurie, you had a wonderful growing up, mom and dad, and your daddy, a engineering professor. You managed to finish college at the university in engineering before you had to go to war. Went to war, served your country well, came home, or married your sweetheart, had this wonderful family, and then this great career that you've told us about. As you look back on the period of time of serving Uncle Sam during World War II, how do you look back on that experience? What does it mean to you to have served?
Well, it was a unique time for me, and I was glad to serve our country. And it came at a time in my life when I was young and able to handle it.
Yeah, those are great words. Laurie, I want to thank you very much for this interview, and most of all, I want to thank you for what you did for our country.